Are you a busy parent? Do you feel like you're being pulled in multiple directions all at once? Are you exhausted and overwhelmed? Meet my mom. Her name is Santi Tenikela. She's a pediatrician, expert in mind-body medicine, and a life coach. She can help you break free from guilt and overwhelm so that you can enjoy the life that you've worked so hard to create. She can also teach you how to support your family in a more holistic way.
Welcome back to the I Am Well MD podcast. Before we launch into our episode today, I wanted to say a few words. First, I want to thank all of my listeners. At this point, this podcast has a worldwide base of listeners, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being part of my journey. I have learned so much, and I hope you have too. Secondly, I'm going to be taking the next several months to work on some personal and professional goals. As such, the I Am Well MD podcast is going to be going on hiatus. But I will still be here, so if you have questions or are interested in coaching, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or through my website, iamwellmd.com. I know that I only personally know a fraction of my listeners, and to know that you have given me a place in your world means everything to me. So don't be a stranger. Thank you for trusting me and allowing me to be part of your beautiful journey. All right, without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to today's guest, Tenay Benes. Tenay is a speaker, podcaster, blogger, and author who helps people and organizations win the war on complex illness. Along with her husband, she's building a movement to transform the health, wellness, and human services space by applying the lessons she learned in her own complex healing journey and her career as an intelligence officer. She is a bachelor's in biology from Johns Hopkins University, a master's of business administration, entrepreneurship, and consulting from the College of William and Mary, and an in-progress master's in information science at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Tenay, it is so great to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey. How did you get to be where you are now?
My journey started in Turkey. I'm a naturalized American, I guess, an Americanized Turk. And I was born to a pretty dysfunctional family and had a lot of childhood trauma. My parents divorced immediately after I was born. Grew up with my grandparents and my mother. They were immigrants to Turkey from Bulgaria. So they were minorities in Bulgaria, had a lot of racial, ethnic trauma from that experience, also religious persecution. And then they eventually immigrated to Turkey because that's where their ancestry came from. So they were super traumatized. They had traumatized kids. Everybody had mental health problems between complex PTSD, ADHD, schizophrenia, narcissism. That was my environment growing up. And when I was school age, my mother remarried to an American, immigrated to America, and then grew up on the East Coast where it was all about performance, work, grades, eventually getting a job, being in sports. I did all of that really well. And for me, performing, getting good grades and getting into a good school was my ticket out of the chaos that was my home. So I was very motivated to do well in that area. I ended up going to Hopkins and studying biology. I wanted to cure cancer because I had a family friend whose husband died from cancer. And that was a pretty formative experience. But Hopkins undergrad was pretty highly competitive and pretty antisocial, at least in the biological sciences. And I ended up burning out. So by the time it was time to go to medical school and all that, I said, send me to war instead. That seemed like less of a burnout because I had accepted an Army ROTC scholarship to fund my school, at least partially there. So I owed the US government 4 years active duty and 4 years reserve service. And the Afghanistan and Iraq wars had kicked off around that time. So went into military intelligence corps, deployed twice to Iraq, and I ended up medically evacuating out of Iraq the second time. because my mental health just started getting worse and worse. And the psychiatrist gave me more and more medication until by the end, I needed a medication to wake up, a medication to go to sleep, a medication to take in case I had any disturbing thoughts. And I literally could not put a sentence together anymore. I was so drugged up. Eventually, they said, you need to be medevaced. There's nothing else we can do for you. And that medication cocktail broke my body and it broke my mind. And I'm still recovering from that medical injury. I think they call it a polypharmacy medical injury. And the side effects of being given off-label prescriptions led to glucose dysregulation and chronic fatigue, all of these things that I've been dealing with ever since and healing from, fortunately, but it's been a long journey. Eventually got out of the army, went to business school, tried to do the corporate world for a while. I became everything my parents ever wanted me to be. And I hated it because it just wasn't my heart to sell work and sell work. Yeah, we're consulting, but we're just selling more work. And I eventually was like, I need something a little more meaningful in my life for a purpose. So I decided to go into seminary. And that's where I found out that I had a lot of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the gracious people at that school, they saw these signs and symptoms that no one else had seen, that the 12 psychiatrists and psychologists that I had worked with in the previous 20 years had not seen. And they said, you really need to focus on getting well. And there's something interesting about being sick for a long time, but also having this kind of performance mentality that I think all Americans are really steeped in, is that sometimes your body will suppress symptoms until it's safe enough to show them. And that safety usually comes with, you have to be in the right community. You have to slow down enough to listen to yourself and others. And that's what seminary provided, because the homework was literally to read something, reflect, journal, and pray about it. And you do that over and over again. And when the topics are about love, love between you and God, love between you and your family members, love between you and your friends, love in community, in church, out of church. When it's all centers around relational topics, all of a sudden the wise mind in your brain is like, oh, we are in an environment where we can bring up some symptoms here and some wounds. And so that's what ended up happening. And all of a sudden my health crashed in that environment. It's never in the super stressful environment that I think the breadth of our symptoms really show ourselves. It's in the safe environment afterwards. So I quit my life, moved back home, became the homeless veteran, living in my parents' basement kind of deal, although it was their third floor, and threw myself into this healing journey. And I have a biology degree from Hopkins. I was an Army intelligence officer, and I thought, surely I can figure this out. If I can figure out how to turn our area of operations from the worst and most unstable in Baghdad to the best and most stable with the greatest essential services and education and economics and all that for 250,000 people, I can certainly figure out how to navigate the US healthcare system to get better. I was wrong. It was so difficult and so impossible. And the gulf between the things I was reading in the academic research, which I was looking up, I knew how to look up NIH PubMeds, or now it's Google Scholar, and look up key terms and try to build a hypothesis of what I'm dealing with and follow the rabbit trail, different keywords and symptoms, look at the dates and try to develop concepts of how the researchers are perceiving the development of illness and therefore the cure of it. There's this huge gap between what I was seeing in the academic research and what I was experiencing in the industry, in the professionals that I was going to. The DoD and VA were the least trained. They were the farthest, the largest gulf between the academic research and what they were practicing. So I would go to the VA providers and I'd say, I think I'm dealing with trauma. Do you have any therapy? And they were like, we only do evidence-based practices. And I'm like, okay, and what's that? And they're like, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'm like, I did that at Walter Reed. It didn't really work for me. And I looked up why, and it's actually not a trauma therapy at all. It is anxiety management and reframing. It's a downstream effort. And if you use the right therapy at the wrong time, it is the wrong therapy. I was like, but I'm reading about eye movement desensitization reprogramming. I'm reading about a couple other things, but that's not evidence-based. No, actually, there is evidence. It just hasn't been approved by your insurance network. That's a different picture. And so I found that really frustrating. And I said, okay, I just need to start paying for these things out of pocket, which gave me much more room and freedom to start exploring what are people saying working. And if I listen to someone's online testimonial and their symptoms seem similar to mine, and then I try to compare that to the academic research and everything, and I say, okay, this is something I'm willing to try, then I'll just find a provider that's offering that therapy or whatever. But that was hard because Google searching integrative medicine doctor who works with people with PTSD in my area, those type of searches don't tend to produce great results. Incredibly frustrating. So what I did is I cried out to God. I was like, what is going on? And I went to seminary. I had a strong faith at the time. I think we can always grow in our spiritual practices and experiences, but I said, I read this Bible and you talked like paragraphs and paragraphs to people. And to me, I have to pray 6 weeks to get maybe a yes or maybe a no. Should I see this doctor? Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm like, I can't do that. I have places to go and people to be because I'm dying. My body had at this point shut down and I could only leave the couch for an hour a day. I had very limited energy and I needed that hour to be the right provider, getting the right care, because that's where I was at. And in this prayer journey, started actually connecting to the voice of my higher power, whom I call God, and started getting these spontaneous thoughts of hope, peace, and wisdom saying, try this technique, don't do this one, try this organization, don't do this organization. And I decided to use the scientific method. I was like, I'm either schizophrenic or this is God and God exists and talks to us. So I'm going to test these voices. I know from my training that schizophrenics who listen to schizophrenic voices, their mental health and physical health decreases over time, their relationships decrease over time. And my training from seminary is that if you connect with God, then your health should improve, your relationships should improve, your mental health, physical health, all that should improve. So I'm going to test it for 30 days. And if I listen to these thoughts that are full of hope and peace and obviously not coming from me because I'm a wreck on the inside and things get better, then I'm going to say that's not schizophrenia and that's God. And if things get worse, I'm going to check myself into a mental health clinic. And things started getting better. So I was like, it could be a random coincidence that my brain all of a sudden knows these things that I never learned of or heard of before, or it could be from outside of me. So I decided to just go with that plan and I started getting better. I would get guidance for try this doctor, not this one, try this therapy next, skip that one. Oh, what that doctor said, half of it works for you, half of it is for someone else. And so I started parsing through the consulting that I was getting from all of these different providers and walked out of that pit. I started being able to leave the house 2 hours a day and 3 hours a day and 4 hours a day. And then eventually was able to resume within a year and a half full-time work. But I was changed forever. I learned so many things about how every part of our life is connected to every other part. And so we have to care for each part, not just the physical, not just the mental, not just the spiritual. And explain that journey in great detail. The first 5 years in this book right here. It's called Heal or Die, a true story of trauma, chronic illness, and unexpected help. And I just published it in September.
Congrats.
Thanks. From there, it shifted, started doing health coaching. People would just come to me. I didn't do it professionally. They would just come to me. I'm in a crisis. You used to be in a crisis. You walked out. How did that happen? And so I would tell them what I learned. Here's what I learned about holistic healing. Here's what I learned about different types of providers, Western medicine, Eastern medicine, alternative medicine. And not just medicine, I guess, healthcare, not just the medicating of it all. Even in English, we tend to call it medicine, but medicine is a limited term. Here's what I learned about how to care for every part of your being. Here's what I learned about tuning in to the voice of your higher power, a power greater than yourself. Here's what I learned about believing that you can heal and never hiring a provider who believes anything less. That was a big one.
Having a provider, and I'm not limiting this to physicians because there are lots of different people who provide healthcare or well-being services. But if we already think that the end has arrived, it colors that provider's ability to provide unbiased, wholehearted advice, recommendations, treatments,
Exactly.
and to stick with it because it's not a one-time thing. Sometimes it is truly a journey, like you mentioned.
It blows my mind now, but I saw 12 psychiatrists or psychologists who all gave me the same line. You have a biochemical imbalance in your brain that spontaneously occurred for no reason. There is no cure, and the only thing we can do is manage symptoms with this medication, which you will have to take for the rest of your life. And they said that over and over again. And I was like, I'm no doctor, but I'm pretty sure in the universe, nothing happens for no reason. So that response just never sat well with me, but it's still out there today. For example, I'm coaching, I'm skipping a lot, but let's just go with it. I'm offering health coaching to someone whose child is nonverbal autistic. And I met her, met the family, and I said, hey, I would love to help you try a different path to caring for your child. She's done all of the special education and they tried behavior therapy and all of that and just didn't work. But they're pretty stable, a lot of medication for ADHD and all this, pretty stable, but her kid is going to stay that way forever. And I got this magazine. It's got scientific research in it, academic articles from PhDs and medical doctors who do research, a double-blind test, the standard. And I said, look, here's what this says. Here's what this means. If you don't have a biology degree, this means that we can do nutrition interventions. We can do abstaining from some foods, minerals, supplementing with some. We can do Epsom salt baths. We can do this, and this. There's 6 interventions that they tried, and they learned to do it in a certain order. And then that produced the greatest results. And they turned nonverbal kids to verbal kids in school age. And I said, this is possible. If it doesn't work, you've expended some effort and you've experienced some disappointment, but your kid has not suffered physically, mentally. They will not get worse. So the risk to your child is 0. There's an emotional risk and there's a financial risk, but your kid's not going to get worse. And she said, thank you for telling me. Let me think about it. She works in healthcare, went to a few doctors and nurses and said, what do you think about this? And they all said, no, don't do it. It's not evidence-based. And then she came back to me and she was like, distraught because what you explained seems to make sense, but these people I trust, they say it's not evidence-based. And I said, it is evidence-based. I literally showed you the evidence. They're just not aware of it. Those are 2 different states. If you are a provider and you are about to say that something's not evidence-based, I need you to stop and go look it up first to see if anything's been published in the last 20 years since you went to medical school. I'm upset about that because I just said, perhaps you can show her the academic research article with the citation. Perhaps she can then go and look it up. If you want, I will look it up and send her the original peer-reviewed journal published article. So it makes me mad. Is that provider trying to be harmful? No, not at all. Trying to do her best. But there's so much power in her words that she needs to check her statements before she makes them.
Life can feel like a constant balancing act. Work deadlines, family responsibilities, and everything in between. It's really easy to get stuck in go mode without ever stopping to ask, what do I really want? Imagine if you could set boundaries with confidence, say no without guilt, and start doing more of the things that light you up. That's what life coaching is all about, helping you get clear on what matters most and giving you the tools to make it happen. Your life is unique, your journey is unique, and your solutions should be too. If you're ready to stop surviving and start living with intention, let's talk. Visit me at iamwellmd.com and click on the link to contact me. Send me a little message and we'll get you started with an introductory call. I hope to see you soon. So I'm going to interject here because we all need to have this article. You'll have to send me the link.
I will.
But I think you're right. I graduated from medical school in 2009, but things have changed. And even when it comes to my own journey in learning about integrative medicine, books are published, it takes forever to publish them, first edition, second edition, et cetera, et cetera. By the time the next edition has been published, I'm already seeing data on PubMed and other reputable scholarly resources. I'm already seeing the data change. It is crazy how fast medicine is growing, and not just in integrative medicine, but in all areas of medicine.
Which is fantastic. It is a good
Which is
problem to have.
amazing. Yes. And it does mean that we are kept on our toes. And so when it comes to what is asked of a provider during those times, we err on the side of caution simply because maybe we haven't all had the time to look. And when it comes to recertification, we are encouraged, forced to maintain recertification. We're asked that we stay abreast of the latest and greatest to help with all of our patients. But sometimes that newest information does not hit the test questions that we have to study on. So there's like a certain amount of lag time that happens there. And I find that really incredibly frustrating. I will say a lot of hospital systems will allow for us to have time to do continuing medical education, and that's amazing. That is such a boon for all of us. But these unique sort of situations, because not everybody's cookie cutter, how do we spend our time studying? If you have 100 patients with, I don't know, chronic kidney disease and 2 patients who are on the autism spectrum, and I'm just using examples, we're in this formulaic factory model where we're like, well, I have to know about these 100 patients and then I only have 2 patients this. So then they fall by the wayside, and it's terrible when that happens. And then you have the experts that are doing that one particular area of medicine, and they are just drinking from a water hose. It's just, they're inundated then. I do feel like in a lot of ways, medicine has not leveraged its greatest strengths, which is we have a huge community available. I think we're starting to go in that direction, but we're not there yet. And it's hard to be on the inside and looking at all this. It's just as hard to be on the outside, if not harder, because there's that part of me too that had to be the medical advocate for members of the family who've been sick and wrongfully diagnosed, misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, and even for a physician advocate to say, hey, there's something seriously wrong, that we're going to be having a medical emergency if this is not taken care of, and then to be pushed aside. Because that has happened to me, unfortunately. How much expertise do you need to have
to be heard?
That's very frustrating.
Much proof.
And then even communication, like, again, being a physician advocate for a parent, as an example, where the doctors are withholding information because they're not sure. I'm like, no, look at me. I know how this works. I may not be a surgeon. However, I need to know certain amounts of information because I have an incapacitated parent where I have to help make medical decisions. Can you give me more information, or can we expedite this? He's going to die if we don't do anything. It's just frustrating. This intersection of understanding wellness and leveraging all of our community resources and being a good listener and having the time to learn, both as a clinician or healthcare provider, as well as patients. I think in this respect, I have so much respect for you because you've done the reading, you've educated yourself. But a lot of people still expect that paternalistic form of medicine where we're speaking the words of God.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that sort of mentality is trending downwards for sure. But when people expect that we are going to fix all their problems and don't acknowledge the fact that they have to partner in their own care and take responsibility for what happens next, if we don't have that sort of partnership, that medical relationship, that healing relationship, that journey is interrupted.
I agree. There has to be a good match between the patient and the provider. Most patients, I would say, would have been trained for the paternalistic model. That's the origin of Western medicine. And with the rise of the internet and increasing access to poor information and helpful information, people are starting to gain some power or seek it. And I think paternalistic providers need to be matched with patients who need that right now. And then empowering providers need to be matched with empowered patients. And so the problem that I'm seeing from an information science background, I did my whole long healing journey, went to a lot of places, did a lot of things. Okay, today I am master's student in CU Boulder, Department of Information Science, and I came here to develop a prototype for a health website that would do that matching on the right terms. Because right now, if you're a patient, like my friend, child with autism, she can go into ZocDoc or any other patient or provider directory, and she can look up medical doctor, behavioral therapist for autism, and that's about it. She needs to know the name of the specialty before she can find anybody who can help her kid. She can't look up providers who treat autism. She can't look up providers who treat school-aged autism, like school-aged children with autism or post-pubescent children with autism, because there could be a hormonal factor. She can't look that up anywhere. And like you alluded to earlier, she just has to guess. Let me try this doctor. Okay, now let me try this doctor. Now let me try this doctor. And then pediatrician. This pediatrician might have like one kid with autism. This provider might be really focusing on infectious disease and vaccination, whatever. This provider might be looking at hormonal health. This provider might be just doing basic primary care, whatever. So there's different groups, and she doesn't know that. She has to attend every single one before she finds one that is a fit for her kid. And a lot of people quit. After the first, second, third one, they're like, screw it, I'll just go to the ER. Like when
They feel like they're getting the runaround.
Yeah.
Trust me, folks, we're not doing that intentionally.
Yeah. So there's an information problem here. Nobody can find the information that the providers have. Providers can't find the patients that they're best suited to. So I'm prototyping matching that, where people can search by symptoms. They can search by population for providers that treat that population, even if they don't know the name of the specialty. Even if they don't know, for example, when you have chronic fatigue, didn't know this, but a doctor of osteopathy, some of them might be well suited for that. I didn't know what a DO was at the beginning, so I couldn't have searched doctors of osteopathy that treat chronic fatigue near me. Like I couldn't have searched that. I ran into someone who I was having a conversation with, and they said, oh, I have a provider who can help you. I'm trying to address that information science problem to improve that matching so that providers get the patients that they work best with. And then they don't have to know about all the other things. They just work with their core population. And I think at a bigger level, maybe you can speak to this, are there daily readers for providers that people can subscribe to?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
on a certain topic, you read it for your 5 minutes in the parking lot before you go to work, and you say, okay, in autism, these developments have happened or whatever. Are those working for providers?
I can only speak to myself, but I feel like they're really helpful. The way it works for me is that I get emails constantly about the latest and greatest in pediatrics. And I feel like that's very helpful. Even if I just get to read the headline, I at least know that I've come across that and I can go back to it in my email if I wanted to and click into the article and read more. That is, a lot of specialties and subspecialties have something like that where people can stay up to date with the content that they need. But also we have major information databases that if a patient comes in and we're like, oh no, I remember reading that like 10 years ago, I could really use a mental refresher, we can do a search on, there's literally a website, a platform called Up to Date that we can access. There's open evidence and so on and so forth. So yeah, there are absolutely databases where we can actually look up the specific thing that we're looking for to learn more about treatment and options and stuff.
So why don't as many providers seem to do that? Why did this person that I'm coaching, why did she go to her friend and her friend just say, well, I've never heard of an integrative medicine doctor, but if they're a real doctor, I say go ahead and try it. But if they're a fake doctor, don't do it. Shouldn't that person have been able to go to a place like Up to Date or Open Search and say, is there a specialty called integrative medicine and is it board certified in Colorado?
The question is, will they take the time to look it up? I'll be the first to say, when I was in medical school, the interesting thing, so I went to Drexel, which was previously called MCP Hahnemann. Who is Hahnemann? He's the father of homeopathic medicine. Did we learn about homeopathic medicine in medical school? Guess who taught that?
I bet not.
It was me as a medical student doing a number of topics in complementary and alternative medicine. It wasn't quite integrative medicine yet, but I taught as part of grant funding that I had received from the Arnold P. Gold Foundation. So With this grant funding, I had gone to India. I learned about a bunch of different modalities, including naturopathy, homeopathy, Reiki, Ayurvedic medicine. So I rotated through all these. And in exchange for this grant money, I said that I was going to come back to the medical school and do a lecture series on it. Well, I gave that lecture series 3 different times to 3 different populations, and I still continue to lecture now at the fellowship level. But all this to say is, you would think that the medical school that was previously named after this famous man, that they would even do a 30-minute lecture on what homeopathy was and why we would or would not use it. I remember we got I think it was 1 hour's worth of lecture time on complementary and alternative modalities. And it was a very dry lecture in which we were told that there wasn't enough evidence. And so there might have been some things that they promoted, but largely it was this plus this could lead to a bleeding disorder. This plus this could lead to that. So basically they're teaching herb
Count techniques. Yeah.
They were talking about herb drug interactions and why you shouldn't. Like, be careful with taking St. John's wort with oral contraception. It may decrease the efficiency of your oral contraceptive pill. Well, we understand why not to, but can you talk about the indications in which it would be very helpful? Because if you have a boy who might have mild depression, who's not on a birth control pill, maybe St. John's wort would be okay, right? And he's not on any other medications. So I'm not trying to give medical advice here, but I'm just saying it would have been great to have learned where we could give it as opposed to repeatedly why we couldn't give it. So if this was the knowledge that all my other peers all across the country were given at that particular period in time, I'm a mid-career physician, then all of us mid-career physicians, unless we have chosen to supplement our knowledge base, which I did get dedicated years to, and I still dedicate time to, unless you went that extra mile, you weren't going to get that education and your focus goes elsewhere. So it goes from a place of, I was taught this and I'm going to continue passing that on. Do I look up providers that call themselves integrative medicine? Yeah. And I'm an integrative medicine practitioner. I identify as that. But I still, for the benefit of my patients, will go to the personal websites of the people that they're asking about, look up what their credentials are and what they're saying that they can offer to make sure that everything checks out for my patient's safety. Does that dip into my time with my kids? Absolutely. Dips into my personal time because in my 20 to 40 minute encounter, especially for a complex patient, there's only so much I can do. And then the rest I have to do afterwards. And let's say I see 10, 15, 20 patients a day, and I have to do these extra 5 to 10 minutes of work for each patient, or even 50% of the patients. How much of my time then is taken away for my personal life? That is the question that all of us providers, or many of us providers who have busy clinics, who are insurance-based, are facing.
Yeah.
It's such a conundrum for us. It is definitely a sore spot for me.
The insurance problem and the profitability, we could have 23 podcasts on that. But I'm trying to think of the systemic ways to be able to fix that without just putting it on the provider or putting it on the patient. Like, is there a third option? And I'm thinking maybe there's a research service where you shoot a quick message to someone and you say, hey, for $100 a month, I get up to 100 requests per month. Please verify if this provider is actually certified and is up to date. And someone behind the scenes at the service looks it up and sends you an email and says, yay or nay. Or please send me the top 3 most recent research articles on new autism treatments. Okay, that's a 10-minute research study for someone who knows how to research Google Scholar. So are there services like that?
I don't know, to be honest. I think tonight you have your work cut out for you. But
If
I mean, I
someone
think if something like
on this podcast is listening, you should create that business if I don't do it first. But I welcome competition so we can make each other better.
Yes, exactly. I do really feel like if you have a provider that's open-minded, that is going to be the person that's in your corner. If they're willing to take a moment out to do the extra research to find the right people. I have a repertoire of people that I refer to. Some of them are folks that my colleagues have gotten to know and trusted. And so, like, I have a list of psychologists. We pass that information on. And so, for me, when it comes to integrative medicine providers, it's not just physicians, it's acupuncturists, it's massage therapists, it's chiropractors, so on and so forth. We have to have that holistic view of the human mind, body, and spirit. And if we fail to account for that, then we're literally just siloing all of these health problems. And an example of that would be in traditional Chinese medicine, the lungs hold grief. I have mild asthma. It was certainly triggered when my dad would smoke around me. Well, all of a sudden I had chest tightness and I couldn't explain why. There were no odors. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't out in the cold. It wasn't too hot. I was putting my kid to bed. I was laying in bed with him, and all of a sudden I started having chest tightness. The following day, I found out that somebody had passed. How? How did my body know that?
I feel
Right?
chills. That's
And
my spirit saying that's accurate.
how did my body know that? And it took a little bit of time for that chest tightness to pass. I did not need to take my albuterol. Like, I was fine, but I noticed it. And it's just amazing that now, to another physician who might be listening to this, they might be like, that's anecdotal. I admit it might be anecdotal, or I might just be in tune with my body, or I might just be crazy. I might be a combination of the three. Who knows? But the point is, there's so much more that we don't know about. And I think having that spirit of curiosity is really what's going to propel wellness and the field of medicine forward. Now, we are very curious. This is a very curious profession. We are constantly looking things up and constantly doing research. And like I said, sometimes it's difficult to stay abreast of all of that information. How do we access it quickly and easily? I know that people have found me on various websites, avenues that I didn't even think that people would look up.
Including probably this podcast, right?
I don't know. What did they look up to find this podcast? Wellness, integrative medicine?
We welcome your comments below.
Yeah. So, I mean, if there's an easy way for people to find what they're looking for, and I think using a diagnosis-based platform might be very helpful. I think the pitfall that you face with that is a lot of people misdiagnose themselves.
Yeah.
So you still have to go through the evaluation period for whatever it is. Who's to say that my chest tightness was truly asthma and not muscular, like not musculoskeletal?
Which is why I want to be able to search by just symptoms as well. Especially when you're at the beginning of your healing journey or your holistic healing journey, let's say. You're at the beginning and you decide usual care is not working. And then you say, now what? My goal is for someone to say, okay, chest tightness, enter it in. Chest tightness providers serve through near me. And you can get asthma doctors and pulmonologists and all this, and you can get traditional Chinese medicine. And then now the power is in your hand. You've got a little bit more health literacy to say, I never heard of this thing called traditional Chinese medicine, but it says that they address chest tightness. And now I'm going to pray about it or think about it, meditate. I'm going to talk to my people I trust, and I'll say, do you think I should try this or this? And now the power is in your hand. And you didn't just spend 10 hours trying to figure out what are all these specialties and what do they mean and which ones address chest tightness. We just have directory telling you that, which goes to this other thing that you mentioned earlier, the paternalistic model. Like, patient power is incredibly important. Like you said, if you don't have a patient who feels empowered enough to take their portion of their healing journey into their own hands, then the healing relationship will always be ineffective to some degree. I read this research study recently. It was done in one of the European countries, and they mapped the power of everybody in these patients' healing ecosystem. Doctors, big pharma companies, media, health media outlets, caregivers, patients, and then government agencies and patient advocates who are supposed to be supporting them. They mapped power and access. Of all those people, the patient had the lowest power. The doctor had the highest power. The patient advocates tended to side with doctors and not the patients. And the people who had the closest access to the patient in terms of being in their ear were the big pharma companies through marketing, not even the doctor. The patients knew more and heard more about which medications they should tell their doctor they want to try than getting that from the doctor. And the people that the patients have the least access to were their providers. So everything's upside down. And that's Western medicine for you right now. I think that's a pretty accurate description of what Americans are experiencing too. And so patients have to gain their power. They have to take it little by little. And it starts with believing that you own your own health. And if in the case of being a parent, you own your child's health until they're developmentally capable of taking that on. And so you have to flip that paradigm and think through who is the most powerful in this situation in my ecosystem right now, and then take steps to change that. So self-educating, learning how to advocate for yourself, picking providers that believe in a health healing team and not like, this is my show, my way or the highway. Those are all super important that I had to learn in my own healing journey. And I now get to help other people with their kids, my own kid, as we're working through and healing generational neurodivergence. I could just talk about it forever, but I'm going to stop there.
I genuinely enjoy this conversation. Like this, to me, is it, right? Like when there is a need, that is when new modes of thinking occur, new avenues for learning and implementation occur. And we are at that turning point in the wellness and medicine sector. So we are asking for people to become educated and become part of that movement, not for us, not for our benefit necessarily, for everyone's benefit. Because you know what? We clinicians are also patients. And I'll be the first to say, if I have a doctor that's taken really good care of me, I'm going to stick with them. I don't care how far I have to drive. I don't care how long the wait is. I will be there. And not every physician is going to be that type of physician. Not every patient is going to have the time or patience for somebody who has a wait time or somebody that's far away. And so in the end, we're at a point where like telemedicine and telehealth has really taken off in the world and across the US. And that's something that I think the field of medicine is leveraging. So in terms of expanding possibilities now, you don't always have to have a practitioner that's necessarily in your geographic vicinity. You can find out whether or not somebody's willing to offer telehealth for an issue that might lend itself well to telehealth. Obviously, if you have to have a physical exam, that makes it a little bit more of a stretch, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So really, when it comes to empowering patients like that, and my patients know this, my parents know this, that is what I'm all about. I'm all about the education. I'm all about being there to support them. I know my patients are going to age out of my care once they cross that 18, 19 threshold. They're going to be going into what, quote unquote, the adult world. And medicine is practiced a little differently, not too differently, but the flow of how they're cared for is going to change. The more I can instill in my patients to help them, to leverage, to empower themselves, to advocate for their own health, there's no end to what I'd be willing to do for them.
That foundation is crucial.
I've told other people this, including your husband, actually. If I'm able to even just help one person by educating them, I might not be the one that's able to help them with their health problem, but if I can even point them in the right direction, that's a step closer to where they need to be.
And I love that spirit of collaboration right there, right? There's humility there to say, I might not be the solution for every patient and with every problem that they have. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have to be God. I don't have to know all, be all, see all, and have all. And finding providers, that was another indication for me. Finding providers who want to refer, who want to collaborate, who want to even say, I might not be the right person for you, but here's a potential next step, is a green flag to consider their advice more valuable than someone else's potentially. And that spirit of collaboration, the academic research agrees that coordinated collaborative care is the gold standard for curing every kind of illness. And I call them complex illnesses. People throw that term around. It's not like a medically defined term, but the chronic illness, the developmental illness, the congenital, rare, even the injury caused illnesses. I had a medical injury. Now I have subsequent chronic illnesses that originated from that, or traumatic brain injury is an illness that can cause these subsequent illnesses, or is an injury that can cause illnesses. So that those kind of complex illnesses that affect more than one system in your body and more than one area of your life need coordinated collaborative care. And so you need to find providers who are open to the minimum level of coordination or collaboration is a referral, okay? Minimum. And then higher levels might be I'll send a quick note to your other provider, or I'll send your referral with some observations that I have given and why I'm referring it to them. And then next level is like, oh, we're actually chatting, or we email back and forth and I just answer some basic questions. Yes, in today's insurance model, there's no room for, and I think that needs to change. But with Medicare changing, they've added in 2017, they added some collaboration codes between psychiatric and physical health services. We're seeing some shift in that. They're saying, hey, maybe providers need to be able to collaborate with or without the patient there, but with the patient's approval and on behalf of the patient. And so my long-term 20-year vision is that all providers would collaborate whenever they needed to get a second opinion, and they would be paid for it, and it would be part of their billable time. So let's not crush one population to help another. Let's help everybody.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the period of time that I worked at a pediatric clinic with an embedded psychologist was
Mm.
amazing. It was just great to say, hey, I have this patient here. These are the symptoms I'm seeing. These are the things that the parent said. What are your thoughts on that? Could we do a soft handoff so
Mhm.
that you can meet them? And if there's any stigma with psychological care, that you can kind of just sometimes having a face and a name and that gentle presence is enough to kind of destigmatize something. But that was just such an asset to have in the clinic setting. And all of our care should be collaborative. That would really help patients tremendously, and it would help us tremendously. There's one thing that you had said earlier that I wanted to reconnect to, and it was when it comes to complex illness, chronic illness, it's not enough to just put the band-aid on it. And I think sometimes with the amount of time that we have in this insurance-based system, we only have enough time to throw the band-aid on and move on.
Yeah.
And that really contributes to moral injury amongst clinicians across the board, where we know that we have to do a little bit more digging, but we don't have the time and we know we may not get reimbursed for the time that we do spend. So there are certainly things in the system that need to change because even from the physician clinician standpoint, because of all this moral injury that's happening, because we are forced to work so fast. It's like being in a chocolate factory and you have to wrap all the candies and the conveyor belt's going way too fast. You can't catch every single one. That's a horrible comparison to patient care. So you have patients on a conveyor belt, and we feel that we're not in a position where we can help everyone. So some people get the help that they need, and some people get subpar care. And we try our best. The intentions are, most of us went into medicine with great intentions for healing others. So, yeah, a lot of clinicians have left medicine because they feel like they can't practice medicine the way that they wanted to. So, I'm all for solutions and innovations to help all of us get through this part of the journey that America's going through with healthcare.
And the feedback that you're giving right now is really insightful for someone who's not a provider like me. And the moral injury is really fascinating because I have experienced moral injury in other places in the Army. Usually, the first response to moral injury is denial. It's saying, no, I didn't do anything wrong. Nothing bad happened. That can be a protective concept. And I think a lot of providers are there still. No, I'm
Yeah.
helping everyone. I'm doing God's work. And I want to say to those providers, no one is perfect. And even though there is kind of a culture of expecting perfection from our providers, it's an unrealistic demand on you or anyone. So, step one is I would invite you to meditate on what would life be like if you didn't have to be right all the time, or if you didn't have to always make the right choice, always be able to help someone the way that you wanted to. Would that make you a less valuable human being, a less lovable husband, wife, father, mother, doctor, friend? Would that take away all the good you did if sometimes you inadvertently did less good than you wanted to? Would that cancel out all of the good that you did? And as we meditate on those things, talk about them with other counseling, as you kind of let go of the demand to be perfect, then it's easier to say, perhaps I'm not always giving the level of care that I wish I did or could. And then from that place of humility, humility does not mean I'm going to say I suck. Humility means I see the strengths that I have accurately and I see the weaknesses that I have accurately. Now I can see the picture clearly, and then I can take steps to play to my strengths and ask people to help with weaknesses. And then from that place, I would invite providers to think about systemic fixes. So instead of doing one patient at a time, say, hey, there are certain topics that people ask from time to time and they're out of the blue. So maybe I train my receptionist or maybe I train my whatever to do a little search in Up to Date and print it out for a patient on their way out. Or maybe I have a little library of books that I recommend to people or books that I'm always hearing from other people on topics that I'm not very well versed in, but they have a whole protocol in the book of how to deal with this issue or that issue. Maybe it's crazy childhood trauma, maybe it's asthma, maybe it's something else, right? And then you give that book, and that's part of your treatment now. It's like, okay, here's a next
Yeah.
step for you that's systemic, and I don't have to put a lot of brain power into it after the first time.
I fully agree. I think to an extent, many clinicians already do that. They embed that education into a handout, like what we call the after visit summary. But many of our patients don't read it. So please read your handout. And here's the other thing I'm going to say is it touches my heart. What you said about humility and perfectionism, it touches my heart because many of us went into the field of medicine. Our training was all about perfectionism. You go into surgery, you have to be perfect. There's no room for error. And that is a tremendous amount of pressure that trainees have to undergo. And then when they become attendings, they are carrying that. They want to be perfect. They want to do good. And unfortunately, the suicide rate for physicians is way higher than the general population. I think the statistics right now are 400 physicians die every year by suicide.
Wow.
There is a huge mental health burden amongst physicians. And the crazy part, unfortunately, is that many of them are fearful of accessing behavioral health services because they don't want that to go on their record. They don't want future employers to know that they may have a behavioral health diagnosis because they're afraid that it might impact their ability to get another job. And how awful is that? That physicians who are supposed to be the ones helping people find the healthcare that they need feel scared to access what they need. It's an ongoing problem. We're still not there yet. There's still a lot of physicians who will not access behavioral health services for this reason. And I will say this, when I first created I Am Well MD, it was for those physicians. It was for those physicians who needed somebody to talk to where it would not go on record.
Yeah.
They just needed somebody to listen to. And I'm not saying that you needed to be suicidal to talk to me. No, no, no. I mean that at least I could serve as a listener, a bridge, whatever that person needed. And I had developed this business during the height of COVID because I was feeling the pressure from it. And I was seeing the headlines in the news, and it hurt my heart in a way that I cannot even express. My husband passed the frozen truck that served as the extra morgue in the parking lot every morning on his way into work. It was a constant reminder of what was happening in our world. And he is not alone. I'm not alone. There are so many of us that went through this. And when you're expected to perform at such a high level despite PTSD, because I don't think anybody's happy when a patient dies. I think most of us really feel it, and we are trained not to show it. We are trained to reject the emotions that come along with sadness, with anger, with, again, moral injury. And
which is the opposite, actually, of what we all need our doctors to
yeah,
do. I need my doctor to be sad if my family member dies
yes,
under their care.
yeah.
I need that reflection, and I need to be able to express my anger and my sorrow, and I need them to be able to express their anger and their sorrow, and we need to be able to do that together. And we're trained in this culture of the Industrial Revolution. We're trained to be like cogs in a wheel, and we're not cogs in a wheel. We are biological organisms.
And we need each other. We need each other.
We do.
And that is a bi-directional relationship.
What you
So,
said about providers not being able to access healthcare, it's very similar in the military. Huge stigma against behavioral health. And then if you're in intelligence work like myself, you can actually lose your clearance if you have certain mental health disorders. And especially intel people, they like never went to behavioral health. And then the third thing is if you decide to go, all you got was kind of basic supportive counseling and CBT. And so those are not appropriate to trauma-related mental health. Trauma work is parts work, okay? Period. There are at least 15 types of parts work therapies called ego state therapies. Have childhood trauma that's being maybe exacerbated by your adult provider trauma. The developmental needs meeting strategy, DNMS, highly recommend, 2 thumbs up. If you have more acute trauma, you had a stable childhood, and then you have more acute trauma as an adult provider, then that's where eye movement desensitization therapy, internal family systems, those kinds of things tend to help. And then internal family systems recently took a spiritual turn. So if you feel like bringing spirituality into your therapy would be meaningful for you, then that might be a beneficial model. And then there are versions of these in spiritual places that aren't licensed, but they still worked well. So in the Christian kind of charismatic sets, you can look into inner healing prayer. I know like Buddhism has certain meditation journeys, and there's so many other options. And I would highly encourage people to even consider like 12-step programs. There are programs for, I don't know why, but my life sucks. And I would like to be in an anonymous support group where I just hear other people talking about how their life sucks and is getting better. And I would like to be able to say that without telling anyone what my last name is. Those options are out there. Clergy can't tell anyone about who they're seeing and for what. So certain types of clergy. So I highly encourage all of those. And you can find these in person or online at any time zone. So if you're on night shift and you sleep during the day, you can still find these resources for you. So highly recommend, because you can only give away the healing that you have, right?
Fully agree. Yeah. I do feel like my own healing journey has absolutely informed my ability to provide patient care.
I bet your parenting journey as well, right?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say that when I became a mother, whew, yeah, I was practicing pediatrics for 2 years prior to having my first child. But yeah, once I had my first child, I was like, yeah, we need to make life easy for these parents. There's so much that they're holding together for their child. This was an amazing conversation. Where can our listeners find you?
They can find me at several places. Benes, that's BENES, companies.com, is where my husband and I talk about our health technology that I mentioned, as well as the consulting services that we will be offering starting in September for health, wellness, and human services organizations that want to change their health outcomes by changing the questions that they ask, by shifting the way they use their assets, the way they flex their information that they're already gathering. Anyone interested in investing in health technology can also connect with my husband there. And then Tenay Benes, TenayBenes.com is where the details on my book that I just published is, and also the keynote speaking business. So I have 2 keynotes where one is for people navigating complex illness or their caregivers or advocates. And that's the talking through a holistic healing journey. And that's called the transformational journey of healing complex illness. And then the second keynote is for health, wellness, and human services organizations that really want to improve their complex illness health outcomes. And that's called Winning the War on Complex Illness. So you can check me out there and send a message, and we would be happy to follow up with you. And that is it. I really appreciate your time and love chatting with you.
I enjoyed this too. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom with all of us. I appreciate it. The information shared on the I Am Well MD podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Listening to this podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. All health-related decisions should be made in consultation with your personal medical provider. The views and opinions expressed by me are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of my guests, employers, or affiliated institutions. Likewise, the views of any guest do not necessarily represent my personal or professional opinions. The content shared on this podcast is intended to inspire thoughtful conversation and reflection, not to provide medical diagnosis or treatment.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing, give this podcast a 5-star rating and share it with your friends and family. If you want to learn more about my mom and what she does, visit her at IamWellMD.com and subscribe to her email list. If you leave her a comment, you might just get a shout out in her next podcast episode. If you'd like coaching or support, she has programs available for you and your whole family. My mom is a great pediatrician and a great person, and I hope you like her podcast episodes. Have a great day. Bye.